Hello to everybody. My name is Jack Charlier, and I'm the Executive Director of PTACS, the Police Treatment and Community Collaborative. And we are here very excited today to welcome you to our very first conversation with the field. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but I want to run through a little bit of an introduction to PTAC, who we are, if you're not familiar with us, what we do, and how you can participate in the growing and rapidly emerging field of deflection and pre-arrest diversion in the United States. So let's get started. And again, welcome to everybody who's able to join us today. And if you're watching this on demand, thank you for coming back afterwards so that you can take a look at this very, very important and fun, interactive conversation with the field of deflection and pre-arrest diversion. At PTAC, we are the national voice of and the nation's knowledge leader for the field of deflection and pre-arrest diversion. And these slides that I'm about to show you, which are very brief, will be in the chat box so that you can look at these later and have them as a reference so you know how to get in touch with PTAC, how to sign up for our weekly newsletter called the PTAC Ticker, as well as the future schedule of conversations with the field around a wide variety of topics that are important to the work that you do day in and day out, helping people connect to treatment, housing, recovery, and services across the United States. As I said, my name is Jack Charlier. I'm the Executive Director, but I'm joined by many, many people who form our National Leadership Council, comprised of over 45 national organizations. And we'll show you who they are in just a minute, so you can take a look and say, I know that organization or I work with them. And also joined very much by a large number of folks who participate in a leadership role, including in the strategy areas like you will see and hear from today during this conversation with the field. Any questions you have about PTAC, reach out to me. My phone number is here, my email's here. And again, these slides, so you have our contact information, will be in the chat box for you to be able to look at. The conversations with the field, what are they? As I said, this is something new, something very exciting that's never been done for our field of deflection and pre-arrest diversion. We're a very young field, and we wanted to make sure that all of you know that you're not alone and that you've got a place where you can come and listen to folks as well as share with others what you are seeing and doing in a wide range of topics. So these are live. They're not webinars. They're not presentations. You're going to have a short amount of conversation with a national panel, and then we're going to invite you throughout this entire session in the chat box to send us questions, send us comments, send us thoughts. We want you to participate. Again, these are not webinars or presentations where you just listen and that's it. They're interactive. We're going to want you to ask stuff throughout, and we're going to have time set aside where all we're going to do is take questions from you. They're open. Anybody in the field of deflection and anybody at all who's interested in learning about this field of deflection and pre-arrest diversion and how law enforcement, fire, and EMS are working together to connect people who are in need of substance use disorder and mental health treatment across the United States to the care and into recovery that they need for themselves, for their families, and for their children. Our conversations with the field are free, and they're hosted by one of PTAC's many partners, the Frontline Responders Network. The link is there for our future sessions so that you can go ahead and sign up for the next one. And again, the slides will be in the chat box for you to be able to do that. Now, a little bit more about PTAC. Here's our mission, here's our purpose, here's our cornerstone. The only two things I want to point out while you're looking at this is, first of all, everything about deflection is about reframing the relationship between police, community, treatment, and recovery. How do they work together best so that on encounters of law enforcement with fire, with EMS, as many people as possible can be connected to treatment, housing, recovery, and services without use of arrest, without use of jail, without use of an emergency room or an emergency department. And then in the cornerstone, PTAC, we are field wide. We support the entire field, no matter which path you're using, which approach you're using. We believe the best thing that communities can do is not pick an off-the-shelf brand, something that's stock and ready-made, but instead design something that solves the problem they have in their community or the challenge they want to address and presents a customized solution specific to your community. You can call your initiative whatever you want. PTAC supports a problem solution orientation, not off-the-shelf ways of solving challenges that are unique, whether you're rural or urban or suburban, and vary. And we want to make sure that you know that. And so if you're out there listening and saying, I'd like to do deflection, contact us. If you're out there saying, I do deflection already, and we'd like to do it better, we'd like to do more of it, contact us. We'll work with you in your local context, your local community, to make sure it fits exactly right for what you want to do, what your local resources and leadership looks like, and what your community, most importantly, your community wants to see from how this type of system works. Some of our national partners that you can see, PTAC is just going on year 4 of our time together. But over that, you can see we have partners from the mental health arena, from the substance use arena, from the prosecutorial arena, from the recovery community, from family, from children's, from law enforcement, from advocacy, from all over, that are organizations that have said this thing called deflection and pre-arrest diversion is emerging in the United States. It's important work that's going on to help connect people to treatment, housing, recovery, and services without use of arrest and without use of jail or emergency room. And so we want to thank all of our national partners who make PTAC go in one way, shape, or form. We want to invite you to go to our PTAC National Resource Center on our website. And on the website, you can sign up for all sorts of things, including, this is again the link to it. It's a hyperlink. So when you download the slides that are in the chat box, you'll get to it. These are some of the items we have available. We call it the PTAC Suite. The PTAC Ticker, which is our free weekly newsletter. Promise, it's only a couple items. We all get way too many emails. I know that. So it's just a couple items every week that are about our field, specific to our field and who we are. And all the other items you see up there are available on the PTAC National Resource Center. And we invite you to go there. They're free. Everything PTAC does is free to the field to support the growth and development of every approach and every pathway that's going on in the field of deflection across the United States. No matter what type of deflection you're doing, we want to know about what you're up to. We want to share it with the country and let everybody know this growing field, you're not alone. There's other sites out there as we grow and grow and grow. With this said, then, I'm now going to turn the session over today, the very first conversation with the field, to our moderator, and that is going to be Dr. Chico Tillman, who will take us through today's conversation. So get your comments ready. We want a conversation. We want you to be engaged. We want you to ask us questions. And we feel like this is kind of like a radio show. That's the way to think about it. So Dr. Tillman, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jack. Today, we want to be real intentional and discuss some of the things that are going on today. And our conversation with the field would be situated around community, diversity, and equity. At this particular time, I would like each of our panelists to introduce themselves and tell everyone a little bit about themselves so they can understand what lens you're operating in so they can direct their questions appropriately. We can start with Commissioner Bard.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Granville Bard. I'm the police commissioner for the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts. In my 28th year in law enforcement, I started off as a member of the Philadelphia Police Department in Pennsylvania, left there as an inspector to be the chief of police of the Philadelphia Housing Authority. Did that for a brief time before coming here in 2017. And it's an honor to run such a progressive department. My scholarly work is on racial profiling, race and policing, and I'm looking forward to being a part of this panel this afternoon.
Okay, next at this time, we'll have Takia Richardson.
Hi, my name is Takia Richardson. I am a social worker. I am a senior practice associate at the National Association of Social Workers. My portfolio is primarily focused on behavioral health, kind of starting to bleed over a little bit into more racial and social injustice issues. I have several years of experience in the field of social work. I'm not going to age myself by saying how many, because yeah, I don't want to do that today. But I have a history in child welfare, substance abuse, mental health, and hospital social work.
And finally, Peria Duncan, please.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here today with you all. My name is Peria Duncan, and my background is basically criminal justice, but I've also got some education in behavioral health. experience in there as well. My master's degree is in criminal justice. I've worked as a state regional administrator in Washington State, and I've also worked as a county department head over a continuum of behavioral health and criminal justice programs in Florida. So, like Takia, I'm not going to date myself. I've got some other experience in there too. The corrections is a big part of my background, juvenile and adult experience, both. Deflection programs, diversity programs have always been part of what I've been doing throughout my career. So I'm very excited to be here today with you all. And also I'm a founding member of PTAC, co-chair of the Community Diversity Equity Committee, also serve as PTAC representative for a couple of partner organizations, and also serve as secretary on the PTAC executive boards. Very glad to be here today with you.
And finally, my name is Dr. Chico Tillman. I have a background in criminology, law, and justice. That's what my PhD is in. And also I have over a decade of work in violence prevention. My research interest is around a phenomenon called desistance. Desistance deal with what institution and agency need to be in place for an individual not to reoffend. So we look at what resources individuals need to go from a maladaptive behavior to a pro-social lifestyle. Also, I've worked in the mental health field and also worked with individuals with substance abuse. The way the program or the event will move forward with this conversation, I will ask 3 grounding questions to get us started, and also to stimulate thought among the attendees. And after the 3 grounding questions, I will look into the chat box in order to see the questions that the attendees had and ask them to the members of the panel. I must inform you once again that this is being recorded, but for your benefit, that it can be viewed on YouTube, I believe. I'll find out exactly where it can be viewed, but I know it's being recorded so that you can view this also at a later time, just in case you hear something and want to allow it to resonate with you. I'll begin the question about something that's been going on in our current climate. How does what is going on in the current racial climate impact the field? How does what's going on in the current racial climate impact the field? And we'll start with Peria.
Well, the current racial climate obviously is impacting the field in several different ways. There needs to be some change, and there is being change. There's been some learning going on, and there needs to be more learning going on and more collaboration so that things can get right, basically. There's not a proper use of data. There's not enough sharing. There's not been enough communication. So seeing some efforts in that direction are important to help temper the climate, because things have to be right for everybody. Law enforcement has to feel right in what they're doing. Treatment and community providers need to feel right in what they're doing. So it's important for us to be paying attention to what is wrong and trying to justify and rectify those wrongs by doing the right things.
Would you love to chime in at this particular time, Commissioner Bard?
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, so the current racial climate and law enforcement, the current climate, although we've seen it before, across the arc of American history, this time it, particularly in the beginning, it felt and seemed like there was the potential for some much needed reform in the long run. In the short term, obviously, it resulted in, heightened emotions with, all communities, but particularly communities of color, who for many decades, have been saying that we've been immoderately handled by law enforcement because of our race. I think in many ways, in law enforcement, we're our own worst enemy, because oftentimes we get indignant when we should be getting introspective. Our failure to admit to persistent shortcomings throughout the entire criminal justice system, it really only serves to anger individuals who are subjected to those constant shortcomings. And I think that it also prevents us from taking meaningful and protective actions like deflecting and diverting as much as we should. In my opinion, you'll find, I don't think it's any secret, that racism permeates every American institution, and certainly law enforcement. So I think it should be accepted as fact that minorities that are disparately impacted at every key decision-making point throughout the entire criminal justice system. I mean, it's just a byproduct of the way the country was set up. So we in law enforcement have to take every opportunity to outwardly support any efforts that seek to minimize, that effect, and programs that seek to divert and deflect. They seek to reduce the potential harm. So that's what I say in a nutshell.
Okay, finally, could you wrap that up for me, Sakia?
Yeah, so speaking from the social work perspective, social work has a history that goes back to the late 1800s with the settlement houses with Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr and the development of Hull House in Chicago. And at that time, the residents of the settlement houses, their efforts were focused on providing services to people living in urban communities, poverty, and European immigrants. And so they provided services such as education, healthcare, childcare, and employment resources. And so to this date, social work services and efforts are often concentrated in helping the most vulnerable. So we're supposed to be these agents of change, meaning we're supposed to help enhance people's abilities to solve problems and to be a catalyst for changing systems of oppression and injustice. But the reality is we often work in organizations of social control. So if we think child welfare, prisons and other detention centers, and even schools, because when we're talking about social control, we're talking about the ways in which society tries to prevent and sanction behavior that they feel violates the norms, right? And so social work is on this kind of tricky slope between being an agent of change and being an agent of social control. And the reality is participation and experiences in these organizations of social control continue to be largely based on race and or ethnicity. And this is not something that's isolated to the United States. The research shows that this happens in other countries like the UK and Australia. And so it would be unreasonable to think that because we have a history of fighting for the most vulnerable and we are supposed to fight against social injustice as a profession, we're not affected by systemic racism. And one, that's not true, but two, that also therein lies the difficulty for our profession, because if we slide too far down that slope, veering towards becoming these agents of social control, then we run the risk of further isolating and implementing punitive measures overwhelmingly against people of color.
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing that I noticed during this particular climate. What I've seen is extremists on both is either do away with totally or more funding for what currently exists. There has been no compromise on each side. I understand the severity of what's happening, but in my mind's eye, I think nothing is truly black and white. I think some of the challenges that we face in this current environment is based upon constructs more so than individuals. It's based upon the rules that's in place that allow people to work in a particular way. And that gives me hope because rules can be changed. And if you think about community and law enforcement, some of the challenges in law enforcement is based around the structure or the system that's in place and not so much individuals. So systems can be changed. And if you think about our country, the evolution of America has happened because what? We recognize certain rules not only are ethically wrong, but morally wrong, and we change them. And I think once we can sit down together and begin to change things and kind of like straighten them out, we'll have better results between police and community. I think one of the challenges too, outside of race, which is not mentioned a lot, is class. So it's not just African Americans, it's poor African Americans are typically victimized. So America has this dichotomous hierarchy that's not only based upon race, but class has been critical in the way that communities are policed. And it's in part because typically where the lower the class, the higher the crime. And I think a lot of people, other institutions have responsibilities, and particularly I'm speaking about the media that sensationalize events and incite activities by triggering individuals, by showing it repetitively over and over again, and either good or bad, on both sides. I think we have to be more socially responsible in different spaces in order to produce better results. And also, I would like to introduce at this particular time, Dr. Marcus Robertson, who has just hopped on, and he will take over as the facilitator and moderator of the program moving forward. And we're at the second question.
Greetings. So you had the second question from the FRM?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It's a beautiful question, and I'd love to hear other voices chime in on this from a different perspective. If we've not heard from the commissioner, from some of the others, please let's hear your voice. And those of you out there in the audience who are listening and watching, please put your questions in the chat. If you got a comment you want to make, put those in the chat as well. We want to hear from you. We want to engage you, and I'll yield it back to the panelists who've not yet had a chance to speak. Please.
Hi, this is Perry again, and a couple of the challenges that I've seen, actually the commissioner touched on one of those, and one of the ones that was very big on my list is the fact that there is a denial by people in our fields that there is racism, that there is implicit bias, that these things are going on. And so that is why I also mentioned data earlier. Data is so critical, because if you can show people the facts, yes, there are disproportionate people being arrested of color, being kicked out of kindergarten. I mean, I've worked with the prison to pipeline to prison with juveniles before. There is this stuff going on, and people need to understand it. And when they see the data and share it together and have active listening conversations, they can try to work through some of these challenges. But those are some of the biggest challenges I saw. There's not enough data. They're not sharing data. There's not an analyzation of data. There's not a using of the data to show, here's what's going on. Yes, there is racism. There is implicit bias. There are issues going on that need to be addressed. So I would say those are a couple of big challenges that I've seen in the fields.
Huge challenges. Other voices. Takia, have you had a chance to chime in on this one?
Not this one, but thinking about this question from the social work perspective. So we've been having some offline conversations in one of my coalitions about deflection and diversion, and the conversation kind of always steers back to who gets deflected to what and how. Because this idea of deflection involves acknowledging essentially the commission of a crime, the possession of illegal drugs, and trusting that the systems in place will offer the same response regardless of race, class, gender, or ethnicity, and expecting to receive, the same assistance and compassion if you're a person of color that a non-person of color would receive. And right now, as we've talked about, there's these huge issues with racism, and there's this fractured trust between some communities, law enforcement, courts, even, social services. And the other part of this is that we then get into this, involuntary versus voluntary deflection. And so one of the things that we need to try to focus on is this, funding, availability, and equity. Are programs being funded across the board fairly? Are they available to the people that want to participate in the services? And are the programs equitable?
Those are huge questions, any insight from the panel in terms of your views on the issues that have been raised so far? Chico, I'd love to hear your voice again.
One of the things I noticed in terms of what's broken, in terms of from a equitable space when looking through the lens of deflection is more powerful when done in smaller spaces where law enforcement can humanize the individuals who suffer from SUDs. So you see the greatest success in smaller areas where individual might have grew up with somebody's mom And now their mindset is not that this is a bad person, but this is a person that's suffering from a disease and I want to get them help. Whereas when you work in a larger population where individuals are labeled and stigmatized and stereotyped as being either good or bad, your perspective can be flawed in terms of deflecting because you think arrest makes the community safer. So I think like a relational component around deflection is needed to help. And how we do it in larger settings would have to be outreach, community policing, building relationships, also being able to encourage or recruit individuals who have cultural competency and cultural sensitivity in our most marginalized communities. So we have to change this stain around policing in order to recruit from communities that have a negative viewpoint of it. That's one thing I truly see, because if you can humanize the individual, then you're more likely to deflect them into treatment instead of demonizing them for an incident that took place in their life. So that's what I would like to see. I'm working on a project doing research with individuals from the RAND Institute, and some of the things that we've unpacked or uncovered is that where the relationships are stronger, the deflection program is stronger. So that's what I would like to see moving toward this space. And then again, it goes back to race and class too.
So I just
go ahead, please.
Jump in and follow up. I completely agree with what you're saying, Chico. Relationships are important. And I also think if we're looking at this, drawing the communities together, part of what we have to do is to catch up with the language. It wasn't that long ago that we weren't calling substance use disorders. We weren't calling people who used substances anything other than like drug addicts, being completely honest. So when we're talking about like the crack epidemic of the 80s, it was throw them in prison because they are, drug abusers. And so the language has changed and the programming around it has changed. And so to follow up on your point, Chico, the community effort needs to let the community know, okay, well, we're looking at this from a different perspective, because if you grew up seeing and thinking and knowing that drug use is something that has been vilified and criminalized, why would you trust these systems to do anything other than to continue to harm your community, to harm you, to harm your family?
So when you look at the lens of race and class, it's hard not to think that has changed, because the addict has changed. The individual suffering with substance use disorder has changed. And so it's hard not to view it through that racial lens, to, crack academic, largely minority, poor, and, the heroin epidemic, not that. So it's hard to not look at that. When you look at, the challenges that we face in law enforcement, they're persistent. Piggyback off of what both Chico and Takia said, our problem is we need to be more inclusive and diverse. I think it's naive to think not to understand how the lack of diversity impacts our ability to interact with the most vulnerable and communities of color. And I think that we need to make a greater effort at ensuring that the policies that we implement are protective of the public. And when I say that we need to be more inclusive, I really mean that we need to be more reflective of the communities that we serve. And please don't misunderstand that to mean that I'm saying that an officer of one race can't dutifully police a community of another race. We know that that happens every day, but it's just to say that it's more of trust building when a law enforcement agency is reflective of the community that it serves. I mean, we know that we work in a system that has historically shut out minorities, people of color and women from participating, and we still live with the vestiges of that today. And it would be naive to think that that doesn't contribute to intergenerational trauma and minority communities and the distrust that we face today with that. In terms of the need for our policies to be at all times protective of the public, I said it earlier, at every key decision-making point in the criminal justice system, minorities are disparately impacted. I mean, we know this, yet we constantly resist any efforts aimed at seek to reduce that potential harm. I think some of us in my profession view that as an attack on the entire criminal justice system and a personal attack. And therefore, it appears that we're unwilling to see that this punitive system is capable of harm. I know that I'm proud to be part of a city that, focuses on prevention, intervention, and diversion. In fact, here in Cambridge, the Family and Social Justice section was started so that we could provide, services to those individuals who be better served through a social justice approach than through a criminal justice approach. And so it's, protective of vulnerable populations. So, I don't want to ramble on, but we got to be more diverse, more inclusive, and protective of the public at all times with our policies.
I'd like to put in a note here. Thank you for that, Commissioner Bard. I want to put in a note here to the audience that is, really want to encourage you to post your comments and your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you and to be responsive to your learning needs and the opportunity to engage. Commissioner Bard, you drew a distinction that I'd love to have you say a few more words about. And you drew the distinction between a kind of a social justice approach and then a law enforcement or some other kind of approach. You had a couple of different ways of saying it. Could you elaborate on that a little more?
Right. So, we started the Family and Social Justice section here because, we wanted to be protective of vulnerable populations. So, here in the Family and Social Justice section, we focus on youth, we focus on the elderly, we focus on those who suffer from substance use and mental health issues and are homeless. We understand that traditionally, all of these populations aren't well served in the criminal justice system, but through a social justice approach. So and within our Family and Social Justice section, we have a clinical support unit that has a psychologist, full-time psychologist, and we have licensed clinical social workers. So we make sure that, in addition to homeless outreach services, that we get folks in touch with the social services that they need and, avoid the criminal justice system whenever possible.
Yeah, I heard a question earlier that connects to what you're saying there, Commissioner. Question, I think it might have been Takia that raised it. There was deflection to what? And it sounds like this center that you created is the answer to that question. Am I reading you right, or is that sir?
Well, yeah. Let's say it seeks. That's the grand aim that it has in view. Like, for instance, just to talk about one of our programs, the Safety Net Collaborative. It started with a very simple concept, and when I say being protective, is about being protective of young people. So it recognized this very simple premise that anytime you take a young person and put them in contact with the juvenile justice system, that they were 7 times more likely to be in contact with the criminal justice system as an adult. So it just made every sense, it just made great sense to make sure that you do whatever you can not to put that young person in contact with the juvenile justice system. So initially it started off as this program where you wouldn't arrest the young person until the next time you didn't arrest that young person without any real system of tracking or, them or outcomes. But it developed into this collaborative where we partnered with human service programs, Cambridge Health Alliance, the schools, and the police. And now we provide extensive wraparound services to that young person who exhibits troubling behavior or criminal behavior and their entire family. Because we understand that sometimes I'm only acting out because my mother is spending all the time with my autistic brother. So, we're providing that entire family with wraparound services. And the great point of it is, remember I said troubling or criminal behavior. So obviously the diversion is pre-arrest, like it's prior to the complaint being formed. So we don't ever put that young person in contact with the criminal justice system and the juvenile justice system. And we use a case management system that means that once one of my youth resource officers is assigned to an individual, they stay with that young person throughout their life course, that young person and their family throughout their life course. And I think you can imagine the intense and tight-knit relationships that are developed that way.
Very good. I wonder if there's, in the experience of the other panelists and members in the audience that have similar programming in their spaces to which they're concerned with. Can you speak to what Commissioner Bard has put on the table?
I don't currently, but I have worked exactly what he's talking about in the past. I currently work with training the courts, so it is not connected to what I've done with deflection in the past. But wraparound is totally the way to go, especially for kids. But because the families also have things going on, I think that's fabulous. That's an inclusive thing, which is what is also part of this. And what's important too is, because he mentioned the collaboration. I've done the same thing where I've set up collaborations. You've got to bring everybody to the table, including the city buses, because for example, there's barriers. People can't get to their appointments. They've got their children and whatever. So when I brought the bus people to the table when I was implementing juvenile civil citation in Manatee County, Florida, it was like people were complaining about the bus. I said, well, let's invite them to the table. So we brought them to the table and we were able to work out some different bus routes. It was like, this makes it so they don't have to do 3 or whatever. So, things like that. You got to bring your faith base. You got to bring your business. You got to bring your social work. You got to bring your education, your hospitals. I mean, everybody, your treatment, everybody needs to be working together and looking at the data together. How can our community do better, especially for people of color and children and families, communities? Let's do better for all of us by bringing us together, reviewing what's going on and taking steps to make. Another thing I did was system mapping. You lay out the whole thing and you show where are the gaps and where are the opportunities. Oh, here's how we can work together. Oh, hey, you've got a great lead on that. You take the lead on that. So things like that I think are extremely critical, along with the education piece of letting people know, here's what's working, here's what's in it for you, and here's why we're doing it and how it's going to benefit you.
Amazing.
Because it's all about compassion, right, Peria? Yes. And so you're putting these systems and these things in place and saying, okay, well, these are the hoops that you have to jump through to avoid or, recenter or what, without looking at the barriers. Even if, like you were saying, like transportation is a huge issue. Depending on where you live, it can, be the difference in taking you 20 or 30 minutes to get to a place to having to leave your house 3 hours early, or having to make sure you can get a ride from somebody if you are in more rural areas. And so I think that's one of the things that we don't often think of enough. We put these systems in place and say, well, the things are there for you. Okay, but the things are over there and I'm over here. And in addition to just getting from here to there, there's a financial cost, right? There may be a childcare cost, which could then be another double financial cost. And so we have to have these conversations with people and seeing what they need, not us saying this is what we think you need to be successful in this way. These are some of the things that we came up with. What do you need? And that's where we get back to this, having this idea of having a conversation with and having a relationship with the communities, because there are communities that have services in place for their community and they know what works, they know what doesn't work. And sometimes it's, not traditional law enforcement or, justice involvement or social services, but it works and it's what they've been doing and they're reaching out and they're helping and keeping the community intact.
Got it. So Chico, I'd love to get your voice in here, but I wanted to connect what you're about to say to Dana Taggart's comment in the chat. She said, don't treat the symptom, find out what the root cause and create the change there. And I wonder what you are seeing in the literature of criminal justice as you're engaged in this kind of, the graduate studies review of this stuff. What are you seeing in the literature?
The first thing I want to do is commend everybody for their wonderful comments, because what we're stating emphatically is that it takes a comprehensive approach. It takes everyone in the ecology working together to bring forth change. the challenge is it has to start with government, because the reason why I say it has to start with government and with intentionality is because some of the challenges that are the root causes, organizations can't change. Organizations can't change food deserts, lack of investment in schools, poor environments that consist of perpetual traumas. So it has to be intentionality. Now that I don't think the problem is not us not knowing the answer. The problem is us being intentional and moving toward rectifying these problems that's been identified by so many people. So the data is clear. We need this. But because it has taken centuries to construct this, it's costly. It's costly. So we need people willing to make the necessary investment to revitalize these communities. And that's really what the public health approach is about safety and health. So to revitalize these communities, it's gonna take huge investments because it took, centuries for them to get to this space. And I think as long as we keep making these micro grants to solve 100 or 100-year or 200-year problem, we're only going to continue to medicate these problems. Because they're threaded with systemic racism, but to deconstruct and uproot it needs an overhaul in some of the systems in place. And I'm not even talking about policing. Something as simple as school systems, which are the most important problem in the whole community, because what's happening is with selective enrollment or with schools that allow individuals who score high academically on tests to go outside of the community, what you create is a homogeneous community school where everybody is failing, everybody is hopeless, and the teachers begin to set the standard right there because everybody fails. And what every human wants is a place in society. So going through school, this whole community can't find a place in society because society has labeled them a failure. Because even to go to this school, it's a stigma around it because everybody's failing. So we got to reconstruct how schools look, where there's diversity in schools, so we can identify and have peer accountability and see other people that's striving to give us hope. It's something as simple as that, but it's gonna take the intentionality of everybody coming to the table and saying, hey, let's do this. Let's take some steps toward moving communities that's been marginalized, criminalized, and victimized in the right direction. And we can't put the pressure on one institution or one organization, because the challenge with mental health, and I'm gonna say this, the challenge with mental health is we expecting mental health providers to do the impossible. Why you say that, Chico? Because we expect them to treat people and send them right back into the same condition and expect them to get better. And that's insane, because we haven't changed the condition in which they live. So as much service, all the service is doing is helping them be able to cope with what they're going through instead of heal.
Yeah, that's a lot of strong stuff, and I want to circle it back to the commissioner, and because he's apparently Cambridge is stumbled onto something good, and I want to point that out and lift that up. And I noticed that we had a comment from Michigan speaking about how they're working on a youth justice forum with wraparound services that it sound like the way to go, and it really ties back into what the commissioner's doing out his way. So I wonder if you got some words for us here, Commissioner.
So first of all, I'm starting to feel like a bobblehead dog, and I'm shaking my head. Yes, my co-panelists, got so many salient points that I'm trying to keep up with them. Dr. Tillman started off talking about how it has to be that intentionality from government. And I mean, it's so true. And the problem with that is that, you know, your mayors, your police chiefs, your superintendents of schools, they need to see results right now during their tenure. And so they tend not to invest in the programs that pay off in a half a generation or, you know, a generation. Perry started off talking about the stakeholder, and oh yeah, I mean, that's key. And when I talk about, like, here for our safety net collaborative, every 2 weeks, now it's virtual, but it used to be us sitting around the table, and then not just some low-level member from a department, but the department head or the second in command sitting around the table, making sure that you did exactly what you said you was going to do 2 weeks ago. You know, we got that relentless follow-up like we do in that CompStat model, crime serious to law enforcement officers. And so we relentlessly follow. We meet with commanders every week talking about crime. Well, no, we do the same thing when we're talking about our kids. So, and that way nothing falls through the crack, because, you know, 2 weeks from now, you're going to have to show that you did exactly what you said for, you know, youth A and their family. So that relentless follow-up is important. And that, you know, touched on the point that Takia said, where we make sure that your individual problem, that those wraparound services, make sure that you can actually get to the services that you need, because, you know, your mom don't get off till 6 and there's no one else to get. One of our youth resource officers or somebody in that system is going to make sure that that young person gets to the services that they need to get to. And so, you know, those wraparound services is not just, you know, one size fits all. It's tailored to whatever that family needs. Cambridge has the distinction of being a well-resourced city. And I know, you know, I come from Philadelphia. Money was a concern with everything we did. You know, you wanted to buy pencils, and you got enough money to buy pencils. That's not a concern for Cambridge. So I know it's a rarity to be in. And, you know, a bunch of my friends tease me who are in the law enforcement community. They're like, Brand, you got the Cadillac program down there. We can't afford to do certain things that you do. But I know it's a blessing. And, you know, it's just that relentless follow-up and that intentionality. I mean, they got to be there. And those tailoring of services.
Yes.
Sorry, Marcus. I had a question for you, Brandville. I wanted to know how difficult it was to get buy-in from the community into implementing this system.
So the community, I don't think the buy-in was difficult at all. As we talked about, there's always this undercurrent, and, you know, with members who are in law enforcement who seem to think that this isn't the way to go. You know, they think that you can arrest your way out of every problem, or that we're being too soft on individuals, not realizing that, you know, the system is capable of doing harm, and therefore you want to steer folks, and you should make every effort to steer vulnerable populations away from the potential harm. So I think that getting the buy-in there was more difficult than the community. But one of the things that we do, our YROs, who are the backbone of this program, they're not selected by police leadership. They go through, they got to want to do it, and they got to go through a community selection process where we're told who fits the bill and the character for, you know, obviously we let them know positions are available, but then they apply and they go through a rigorous process to ensure that, you know, they are the right fit to be paired with our youth. Here we're, you know, agents of prevention. Like I thought that in this climate, there was going to be a move to make sure that our youth resource officers, and we call them youth resource officers very intentionally, because yeah, they're in the schools, but they're also in the youth centers, and they're also in the neighborhoods. So, you know, they're there as agents of prevention. And I thought that there might be a move in this current climate to get them out of the schools. And I was surprised when the school board reached out, some members of the school committee reached out to me to have a conversation. I thought it was going to be a real difficult one. And they were like, well, we understand that your YROs have, in many cases, stronger relationships with our kids than the teachers in some cases. And we want to make sure that we can do whatever we can to keep this here. So, you know, it was a sigh of relief, because I think that the program is, you know, like one of the crown jewels of the department, and it, you know, has some very meaningful outcomes. And when I say like that case management system and being assigned to the family and those tight-knit relationships, one of our clients at 16 years old unexpectedly passed away. She had a medical condition that no one knew, that everyone was unaware of. And in her darkest time in the emergency room, her mother the only thing she wanted to make sure of was that Officer Flynn, who is Lieutenant Flynn now, knew that her child had passed away. And when Officer Flynn, Lieutenant Flynn, we made him aware, he spent the next 3 days and up to with the family and still, with the family. It's those tight-knit relationships that come out of this protective strategy. It's not, we're not warehousing kids. We're not funneling them through a system. We're doing everything we can to be protective of them.
Yeah, beautiful stuff, beautiful stuff. I want to pivot back to the audience, a couple comments I want to give voice to. Kelly Firesheets, she chimes in and says, I worry that the opiate-specific funding through federal grants has exacerbated racial disparities. In a way, we treat addiction by funding the development of programs only focused on overdoses or opiate addiction. And it's a really, really important thing to point out. Thank you for that. And Nicole Muniz writes, Chico's comments on schooling reminds me of Malcolm X's statement about living in poor neighborhoods. You'll have poor schools, which lead to poor teachers and ultimately poor education leading to poor jobs, so you can live in the same poor neighborhood, and that is the cycle of poverty. And so right on. And so I wonder if I could pose this question to the panel. It appears that our predicament is that we have significant systemic failures in civil society, and the civil society we live in, where structures that we put in place 100, 250, however many years ago, fail to meet the requirement and need of the moment. And the tools that we're left with are the tools of of the professions that you are stakeholders and leaders, thought leaders in. So, given that the problem is much larger than any single institution, any collection of agencies or whatnot, and yet the problem remains, we cannot simply look away from it, right? We still have work to do, and that's why you come together as PTAC and in deflection and diversion, all that kind of stuff. So I'm wondering now, what is the desired state? What are we trying to get to here now? What would be desirable for systems with modest amounts of money, as well as the Cadillac systems, to coalesce around a set of practices that will help us intervene in this problem, such as it is? Full stop.
I'd say a grassroots effort. I think it's important to have community effort, national effort, regional effort, and just keep chipping away at it. You have to continue to build those relationships, like was mentioned earlier. One police department I worked with, they were building relationships in the community all the time, including an ice cream truck. I mean, they really were building those relationships. They had a mentorship program for young Black men. It was just incredible how much community building they did, having regular meetings with the communities, having community leaders lead the community conversations and what can be done, those sorts of things. And the government lead thing, like was mentioned also, is also critical. They got to take the lead. Like one of the counties I went to was going and they took the lead. They saw this issue in their community of, we don't have juvenile deflection. We need to have juvenile deflection. Let's make it happen. So the government took the lead, but then I, as a facilitator, made sure all the community was there. You've got to educate people. You got to keep working at it and chipping it away a little bit at a time to make things right. Like Chico said, you can't undo centuries of issues all at one time, but you have to keep working at it and making those things happen and engaging people and motivating people to be part of that process, so that these great programs like wraparound services and deflection programs and these kinds of things can happen, so that people can really get what they need, as opposed to not getting their issues addressed and going back in the same environment and having the buy-in issues that go on and those sorts of things. So I would say that.
I want to digress a little bit and address Kelly's question. Kelly That's a beautiful question, but I think the answer to it is relatability. And I want to use President-elect Biden as an example. President-elect Biden participated in writing the harshest crime bill in terms of criminalization of individuals around the crack law or during the crack epidemic. However, life changed his mindset when his son went through the challenges of having an SUD. So now it's relatable, and I'm allowed to look at it as a disease because now I have a level of intimacy with it. As long as it was afar off, it didn't make sense to me. So I think from a racial perspective, once it began to permeate in white America and became a challenge in white America, individuals begin to deeply understand that, hey, this is not something that people desire to do. In fact, they become helpless once the addiction process takes place, that this is in fact a disease. And that has caused this shift along with other factors. I don't want to negate the other factors, but that's been the main catalyst for this shift, as Takia so eloquently stated, in the way they perceive individuals who have challenges with these disorders. Because they couldn't look at his son and demonize him, and he began to see firsthand what the challenges look like. So now it looks totally different. But now what we have to do, Kelly, is advocate that SUD be the way we fund, and not a specific type that only addresses the challenges that has heavily impacted more affluent communities as well as marginalized communities. So I think we have the opportunity to shift the paradigm so that as we talk about equity in this space, so that it's equitable to individuals who have similar challenges, but their challenges might be under the guise of a different substance.
And at some point, we will have to address this idea of treating substance use disorders as a whole. I know right now there's a heavy focus on opioids, but the reality is with the introduction of fentanyl and carfentanil, opioids are in almost everything. They're in cocaine, they're in marijuana, they're in methamphetamines. And so you can't just say like, oh, we're only going to treat, OxyContin or, heroin. Like, no, you have a whole bunch of other issues here, because the idea behind selling drugs is not, doing a service to the community, right? It's to make money. And so if you can, add something like fentanyl or carfentanil to your product and, get a better receivable rate, I guess, by users, and you are doing yourself a service as someone who sells drugs. But we can't just look at it from this tiny window and say, this is all we're going to look at. And I know right now, the federal government is really slow to catch up with things. Anybody that's ever tried to work with SAMHSA knows this. And so this opioid epidemic that had been going on for years, now it's a thing, right? So who knows how long we have to wait before there's this push to start addressing some of the other issues.
Got it. So we're rounding the corner. Got maybe a half an hour to go in this conversation. So we're 2/3 of the way, and I just wanted to have you start to think in terms of the kind of the seminal ideas that you want to have contributed in this space. So we got 30 minutes to get there, and I also want to invite the participation of every single audience member here. This is your opportunity to engage. Please use the Q&A or the chat function to get your questions across and your comments. We'll definitely read them. We'll definitely respond to them, and we definitely will engage with you on these issues. So lots of problem, few resources, some good thinking and innovation going on out there in pockets. What's missing from the movement as you see it today? What's missing that if we had it, we'd be better able to achieve the goals that are implied by your membership and engagement in PTAC? And I leave the question open to anyone who wants to kick it off.
I think data is critical. I think you have to have data, and it has to be accurate, and it has to be ongoing, and you have to review it together and pick out the anomalies and things that aren't right, and because you can skew data. I just learned the other day, by moving an Excel chart, you can skew how data looks. So it's really important to making sure that you're paying attention to what's going on so you can address the issues in a collaborative manner. Would be one idea.
We're missing the good data. What else are we missing? Who else is missing from the table?
I got a simple answer, and we missing you. We missing people. Everybody. So many people are armchair quarterbacks and critiquing what's going on instead of getting involved. The more people get involved, all hands on deck, we can change the ecosystem, even how it looked. We could change resources. We could change structures. I think we have to move away from this adversarial, divisive nature, where it's me against you based upon your ideology or your affiliation, and let's work together and stop some of these ills that's destroying our communities. I think that's what's missing. And it's okay to bring whatever idea you have to the table, but we all have to work together. It's going to take more than the minute, small, minuscule group of people that's actually doing the work. So everybody got to get involved. That's if that would be my answer. We missing you, because it's enough people with ideas who know how to put structures and systems in place to move the needle. But one of the biggest resources we're missing is people that want to do the work, and that could be in the term of volunteerism. Some people just got to say, "Hey, I love my community. I love my people. I hate what's going on. How can I help?" And then we got to pull together all these people and make changes.
I agree. You have to be persistent. And another thing, tying in with what Takia mentioned about buy-in, you have to really be persistent about getting the people that Chico's talking about to buy in. They need to know what's in it for them. Like, for example, when I first came to do the juvenile deflection program, the sheriff and the clerk said, "Don't even think about it." And the clerk gave me a 4-page single-spaced why I'm not going to do it. And I was like, wow, welcome to Florida. Okay, so at any rate, it happened. And it happened because we did it together. I actively listened. Well, what are your concerns? Clerk ended up owning the program. And it was very successful. We tailored it to the community, and it was an awesome thing. So you got to be persistent. I didn't personalize it. It was like, no, this is for the community. This isn't me saying my boss told me I have to do this, but no, this is for the greater good. So helping people understand, here's what's in it for you. Here's why we're doing it. Help us do it. What ideas do you have? Be solution oriented, and continually be persistent about bringing people in and getting them involved and engaging them.
So I went through a graduate program in public administration, and anytime public policy was a part of the conversation or a project, you had to look at it through the lens of others, everyone who would be impacted. And initially that would be tedious, but then you would see the value in it. And then when looking through the lens of others, you saw the potential for harm, then you had to make sure that in that policy you built in protective strategies. And I think that in law enforcement, we fail to look at it through the lens of others. A lot of times our policies and strategies, or even worse, we see the potential for harm and then don't implement the protective strategies because of who will be harmed. Case in point, here in Massachusetts, we implemented hands-free driving. And so that's going to increase the net of individuals who law enforcement officers are going to stop, in motor vehicles. Well, we know that when we do that that Black and brown people are going to be disproportionately impacted. But yet we didn't require any protective strategies like data collection to see what, harms come from that, widening of the net, even though we know that Black and brown people are going to be disproportionately, disparately impacted. So, you know, we have the opportunities to be protective and then fail to implement them. And it's not something that we couldn't foresee or didn't know for a fact were going to happen. And, you know, that should only serve to anger people.
Got it. Takia, you want to add your voice in here?
I do. I would say consistency. So we've had some conversation a couple of times. It's been mentioned, this idea of bringing the community together with law enforcement or social services, but there has to be consistency on that. So you can't have, you know, Officer A show up and, you know, playing chess or whatever with kids, and then Officer B comes in and Officer B is not with that. He's wild, and you're fracturing then the trust that Officer A has built. And so we have to be consistent with this. And one of the things I really liked about the safety net program that you mentioned, Brandville, was that even in this pandemic, every 2 weeks, come to the table. Let's have a conversation. Let's have a discussion. Let's, you know, make sure that we're being accountable to the communities that we serve. Because oftentimes it isn't that way. We're not often accountable to the communities. We make the communities be accountable to us, and that just, well, that's a little backwards.
Got it. Very clear. I'm wondering now, from your professional perspectives, from your discipline's perspective, what are the keys? What are the strategies we want to see employed to help us move from where we are in this very moment, you know, to our next best step? I mean, have we defined that for ourselves in our discipline? What is our next best step to get us to the, you know, where we want to be around deflection and the issues that come into bear in this conversation?
Well, I think PTAC is a great place. We have programs like Safety Net and that where people can learn from each other. There are programs out there that have been working that are awesome, where there's collaborations going on, like mental health and law enforcement going out in teams on certain calls, for example, crisis intervention teams. I mean, there's a lot of collaborating that can be done. So I would start with that.
Others?
I would say focusing and uplifting this idea more of co-responder networks. So there's a couple throughout the country that are doing, you know, some really good work. One of the ones that stands out anytime you mention any sort of co-responder programming is the CODES program in Oregon, which has been in place for like 30 years. And last year alone, they responded to almost, I think, close to 25,000 calls for people who were in behavioral health crisis. And I want to be very clear that I am not talking about abolishing police. I want to be very clear in that. But this is just another option. So, you know, there's the CAHOOTS program, there's a STAR program in Denver. There is expanded mobile crisis outreach team in Austin. There's the Martinsburg initiative in West Virginia. And also, just more central to social work, the American Academy for Social Work and Social Welfare, they have these grand challenges. And so in June of this year, they created the Grand Challenge for Social Work to End Racism. And a couple of years ago in 2018, they also created the Grand Challenge to promote smart incarceration. And the idea behind the Grand Challenges is they find these issues that need to be addressed. And instead of just saying, okay, well, let's just throw something behind it, they throw science behind it. They do research and they try to come up with, you know, the best way to offer some sort of science-based resolution on, science-based resolution to some of these bigger issues. Okay.
Got it. Yeah. An evidence-based approach, you know, no doubt about it. So it's a way to go. I've heard data quite a bit today, and we need more of it and need more analysis of it so that data can rise to the level of information, and hopefully there's some humans around who can use that information when they have it commissioned, and when they see that harm, to actually use that knowledge to create some systems that will will address some of these issues. Is there anything else you see that are key strategies that you would want to raise up and say, these are exemplars of where we might be headed next to really get this thing to move the needle on this thing?
I think
Takia touched on something, you know, and she had to qualify it and say, I'm not saying abolish or defund the police. And it shouldn't be looked at as, you know, an attack when somebody's talking about alternative services and creating alternative routes other than non-police responses. And so, you know, I'm happy reducing the footprint. You know, my officers, if I could give away 10% of the calls they respond to, I'll do that happily. And I think, you know, I can speak for them to say that they will too. It's just when it comes to mental health issues, sometimes, you know, that screening is uber important because it's hard to decouple whether you can just send a social worker, whether you need police. Sometimes it's murky most of the time when it comes in. And even with the best screening, there are going to be times when the police arrive and say, oh, you don't need us, huh? Bring in the mental health providers, the social workers. And there'll be times when the social workers show up and they'll be like, uh-oh, get the police here fast. So just decoupling that. But no, I don't see it as an attack. Personally, I don't see it as an attack on a profession. When folks say, hey, what about, we don't need the police showing up at everything. What about alternative methods? Once again, every effort that we can take and every measure that we can take to reduce the potential for harm, we got to be in favor of that.
I think what PTAC is doing is monumental because it's bringing together people with different viewpoints and allowing them to look at solutions. I think that's critical, just getting everybody in the same room saying, hey, we all want the same thing, if you think about it, but we have different perspectives of how to get there. So I think just being a convener, being able to get everybody into a room, being able to, as Perry said so eloquently, listen to people's concerns, because really that's what it boils down to. When you talk about criticism about any profession, any group, it's typically, I have some concerns that's not being met. And I think if we could come and sit in a space and say, these are our concerns, how can you address the concerns and not attack the people? I think the needle moves. Because at the end of the day, no matter who's the face, who the commissioner is, who the superintendent is, until you change the structure or the systems or address the concern, the problem still exists. It's not about personalities or individuals. It's about things that need to be changed. And the only way things are going to change is if you bring the people that's involved and say, hey, this is what I'm recognizing. How do you feel about it? And then they begin to say, okay, I see what you're saying. These are my concerns. And then you find a way to work together to change it so that it fits both people's needs. And I think the beauty of what we're doing now with this conversation with the field is a willingness to hear other people's concerns and to allow to see why we have reservations about moving the needle in particular ways, regardless of what field you're in. Well, if we move the needle this way, this is my concern. So I think it starts like with what we're doing now, having conversations with the field. And I encourage anybody that has a question to ask it while you have people in diverse fields in a space that can address a concern you may have been having for a while.
I'd like to add on to that common interests. I think it's important to address your concerns with each other, but I also think you need to come together on common interests, and people realize that once they get talking, we're saying the same thing just in different ways. Oh, I got it now. So I think it's important to try to come together and point out we really do have this. We all want safety for the community. We all want people to be well. We all want a healthy community, all those things. And so coming together and remembering the fact that we do have common interests together that we need to work towards for the good and the betterment of all of us, I think is also critical.
Yeah, Dana suggests that another example of collaboration that is worthy of lifting up is the quick response teams in Hamilton County, Ohio. Law enforcement officers and peer support specialists from addiction services councils responding to non-fatal overdose victims, offering connected services. And this is a real, I like that idea, and I hear that baked into the framework of pretty much everything that folks have been speaking towards here. We're rounding the corner towards a close, and I want to make sure that I give you a chance to sum up your ideas from the you know, maybe the criminal justice standpoint, from the social justice standpoint, from the social work, what academia, you know, just kind of sum this up, give yourself a couple minutes each to, you know, kind of just share your heart, share your mind to what it's being just a tremendously rich conversation so far. I'd like to kick it off with Takia.
Feel like I've been talking so much today. I think I've been quite vocal on this chat, and I've said a lot of what I wanted to say. I do want to though echo Chico's sentiments that this is an opportunity for people to, you know, ask these questions. And this is just the first conversation. There will be other conversations. Maybe the way that they will be approached will be a little bit different. But people in PTAC are committed to this idea of, you know, creating something where there is justice in the criminal justice system, and also just addressing issues of diversity and equity. And so please feel free to reach out to anyone in PTAC, and they can put you in touch with anybody on this call if you had any specific questions. But I just wanted to highlight some of the main themes that we mentioned of, you know, wraparound services and consistency and accountability and conversations, and particularly if we're talking about communities of color, relationships. If you go authoritative, you're probably going to get a lot of kickback.
Got it. Very good. Thank you for that. Peria, your ideas. I can't hear you. Unmute.
Okay, yeah, absolutely agree with Takia. I think everything she said is totally right on. I would also reiterate that active listening to each other to make sure you're really hearing what each other is saying is critical. And those relationships, like I say, are also critical. The collaboration piece is where it's at, making sure all the voices are at the table, and making sure people understand and what's in it for them and those sorts of things. And just be persistent and keep at it and keep chipping away, because diversity and equity in our systems has to be righted from where it is at the current state.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Commissioner Bard.
I would just say that, you know, it has to be that pronounced realization in law enforcement that the vast majority of people who we encounter are better served through a social justice approach than through traditional criminal justice approaches. One of the beautiful things about taking over this department was that, you know, eight or 9 years before I got here, they made a pronounced switch from being a legal-centric department that gathered its authority through statutes and ordinances to community policing philosophy, where the department gathered its authority through legitimacy from the community. So, you know, that means enforcing just laws in a just manner. And, you know, it changed the relationships with, you know, the community at large, but particularly communities of color. And so I think that we need to understand, you know, harm reduction is a good thing. And, you know, the social justice approach is not anti-criminal justice, it's pro-people.
Yeah. Complementary. Yes, Dr. Tillman, I saved the last round of comments for you. Wanted to yield my facilitation back to you and allow you to say what you need to say, and then we'll to bring closure. Before I do that, I just wanted to lift up the words of Elizabeth Cruz. She's one of our audience members who said that this conversation, oh my goodness, this conversation is amazing and is needed now and moving forward. It seems that change is imperative for success of the people we serve, and it seems that because there is change needed, many folks are resistant out of fear. And if we're not changing, we're not growing. So thank you all, and so thankful for this conversation. Dr. Tillman.
I would like to take this time to speak as an individual, as an African American whose heart been wrenched by some of the things that's been going on over the last 9 months in America. A person who's been emotional and felt some of the pain because of some of the things that's taken place. However, I understand my platform offers me a level of influence, and I have to be responsible because I don't want to negatively impact people who listen to me just because I had an emotional moment. I have this dichotomous situation. I have family members that are police officers. In fact, my stepfather was a police officer, a retired police officer from CPD. But yet I've been a person that's been negatively impacted by the criminal justice system. So I see this dichotomous situation going on, and I know the only answer is that we find a way to coexist and find a sense of harmony, which I often refer as this marriage between public health and public safety. I realized that what's going on was individual events because of a broken system, but it's also good people within that system that need to elevate their voice and come to the table with people in the community that have a desire to see a better community to move toward change in the norms. And I think it's possible, and I'm hopeful because I've had the opportunity to sit on this illustrious panel with individuals with different viewpoints, but yet we found harmony in our desire to make our communities better and support individuals who are struggling with diseases, whether it be mental or through SUDs. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, and I'm glad to be a part of PTAC as we move the needle toward changing things that are broken in our present state.
So moving, so good, so insightful. Thank you all panelists for what you've contributed here, the time that you took to prepare, the heart and soul that you bring to this thing. I can see from in your eyes and in your words and hear in the inflections in your voice that you are missioned in a way that's far beyond professional pursuit. And it is that kind of inspired, thoughtful leadership that's necessary to have America live up to her promise and deliver the value to her people in the way that only she can. And so I'm so appreciative of who you are, and I just wanted to reflect back to you that it is you, who you are, that makes a difference. And Dr. Tillman, I'll take that challenge back to my neighborhood here in Inglewood, and let them know that we're the one that's missing. You say, what's missing? You say, you. Okay, we step up with you shoulder to shoulder because it's our community and we're all fully, equally, equitably responsible for making sure that the least of those in our community get what they need, folks who are in trauma get what they need, and folks who are responsible for carrying out these systems have the support that they need in order to do this valuable work. So, and then finally, I want to thank Rick Ostrom and the PTAC community and all the others that are involved in pulling this thing together. I'll never be able to call all of your names, but thank you. You know who you are. And I'll yield the floor now to Jacques Chalier to have him bring us to a close.
That sounds good. Thank you very much for that. And let me just put up a slide here just so we can see the next dates of what's coming up. So first, I got to tell you, I went to church on Sunday. That was just 3 days ago. And amen. We have just been at a great session. Passion, intensity, thoughtfulness, expertise, leadership. This was fantastic. And I want to thank the panelists, thank our two co-hosts, Dr. Robertson and Dr. Tillman, for the leadership that you provided, for each and every one of the panelists, for the expert insight, for those who attended this service today, for the questions and for listening. We invite you to come back to our next PTAC, Police Treatment and Community Collaborative Conversation with the Field. It's on the screen right now, as is the link, December 9th. So exactly 1 week from today, same bat time, as we like to say, 1 p.m. Eastern. This link will also be in the chat box. Dokon, if you could put this back in the chat box for those folks who might have joined us late and not caught it at the beginning, the link to the slides that tell you more about PTAC, how to get our PTAC ticker, which are once a week newsletters. You can learn about everything that's going on in the field across the United States, all approaches, all pathways. PTAC is open to any and all, as you heard all the folks on the panel say. We invite you to sign up for the PTAC ticker. We invite you, and in fact, want you to be here for the next service on December 9th and next conversation with the field. And you've got the whole list of the future conversations that are coming up. And with that said, again, just thank you so much for participating today. This Conversation to Field is on demand, and you'll be able to watch it and share it with colleagues in the field of deflection. Share it, care about our field. Thank you so much for the work you are doing day in, day out across the United States, in rural communities, urban communities, in communities of color, in communities where people are poor, and helping people get the treatment, housing, services, and connection to care for their families and for their children that you know they need. Whether you're police, fire, EMS, we thank you for being part of deflection. Treatment, mental health, substance use disorder, trauma, we thank you. Adult, people work with adults or children, we thank you for being part of deflection. People in recovery, that community of folks who have been through this experience, lived experience in the justice system, lived experience with mental health, lived experience with substance use, and now you're back giving back to the community. We thank you, and we thank you as the community, citizens and residents across the country who say, I'm going to do something good and something better with my time today, other than streaming something more on Netflix and getting out and helping out the community. Amen to that. Thank you. PTAC thanks you. We will see you next Wednesday, December 9th, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Have a very good rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.